Hello and welcome to the Deepest Dive from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen, and this is the best, most thorough discussion about what remains of Edith Finch on the internet. Guaranteed, I'm here with Ana Diaz.
Hello.
Welcome, Marcus Stewart.
Hey.
And Jacob Geller.
Hi there.
Welcome, Jacob. Wonderful posture, wonderful pose. You were on MinnMax a while ago. We had like a standalone video interview with you talking about how to make video essays for YouTube.
That's right. That's why you see so many video essayists with the Jacob Geller style. It's because they all watch that video.
And the style is you talking to a microphone over gameplay.
I sound on the edge of tears the whole time. That's my that's my personal brand.
I was thinking about who to pull in for the deepest dive of what remains of Edith Finch, and please, Marcus and Ana, don't take this in any negative way, but I was saying, like, you know, we could use one of those, like, deep thinker type of people, one of those people who really weigh the morality of this thing. And I thought, Jacob Geller, you'd be perfect.
And in fact, I think it was the second video I posted on my channel was about Edith Finch. Oh. So I have talked about it already.
Perfect.
But in a long ago with terrible audio quality. So I'm glad to be back.
Okay, great. This will be fun. So we're going to be talking all about what remains of Edith Finch, the 2017, I guess we'll call it a walking simulator, but we'll get into it. The comments want to get into it. We're going to be talking all about that, spoiling everything about it. So heads up, please. If you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like the podcast version of it and the podcast version of all of our other deepest dives like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Chrono Trigger, Outer Worlds, Animal Crossing, which Ana was on, and upcoming deepest dives, which you might be able to guess what's coming up, you can support us on Patreon at the $5 tier, then you unlock that podcast version. And if you support us at any tier, then you can leave comments for future deepest dives. And that's where all these comments are coming from, is from a wonderful Patreon post. Hey, this game, I played it right when it came out in 2017. So I was at a point playing through this thing again where there were certain sections like, I completely forgot about this. I forgot about plot revelations. Ana, what's your history with Edith Finch? Is this the first time you played it?
Yeah, so I actually picked it up briefly when it came out, and then sort of had like a long gap where my laptop crashed. And so, it wasn't. Was it on PC? I don't remember. But this was the first time playing through in full. And I actually played through in one sitting, which was nice. Yeah,
I definitely did too. It's a wonderful thing, and a huge takeaway from a lot of the comments is they were very thankful for like a shorter deepest dive, which sounds like an oxymoron, but people are appreciative of like being able to sit down, play through this thing, send in a comment. But Marcus, what's your history with this thing?
Same as yours. I played it at launch, ran through it because I was a fan of the Unfinished Swan, which was Giant Sparrow's previous game before this.
Yeah. So
this looked like something similar, but also completely different. So I jumped into it and ran through it in one sitting. I reviewed it for Extra Life, actually.
Interesting. Would you give it for your review? Did they have scores on Extra Life?
No, but it was positive.
Okay.
Like, it was one of my top 10 of that year.
Yeah. I remember playing this game. You know, it's a lot of trying out games here and there. With this job and even back at Game Informer when I played this for the first time. And it was not too long before this game was like, this might be something special. And then it just keeps layering on more and more creative things, going in twists and turns I never could have expected. And it seems like the overwhelming sentiment from the comments is that people enjoyed it. They really got a kick out of it. And I was really delighted by a lot of people who said like, yeah, I got that for free somewhere along the lines and I just never played it. And then the game club actually made me play it. So thanks for everybody that played along, that submitted a comment. And should we get into this thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. Jose Gabriel Amontoy has a real simple one. He says, after all the free games I've claimed, I finally bought a game off the Epic Game Store, thanks to this deepest dive. I didn't think you could buy games off the Epic Game Store. I thought it was just like a funnel for free games. I didn't understand how it worked.
Edith Finch has already been free on it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think I have it. Even when you buy stuff, they throw coupons at you.
You can't get away from it. So he's asking where everybody played it. I was on PC again. Ana, where'd you play it?
I was on Switch, which actually that was, I have some comments on that specifically. But I played it on Switch on my TV.
What do you think about the Switch experience?
So I love this game, so I really hate to say this, but I actually had the game crash while playing.
On Switch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To be fair, I was playing on PC and it crashed multiple times for me. I was running video capture, but Lewis's chapter crashed twice.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was brutal, which it was bizarre, but yeah, I was curious about that Switch version in general because so much of the game is about like fine details and just like the textures on books on the shelves, and I'm wondering, did it look okay?
I mean, what I would say is that the game ran fine. The granularity of the detail, like it wasn't as visually striking, the game, because it was a little, some of the textures weren't as crisp or vibrant.
Yeah, I get it. Marcus, where'd you play this thing?
The first time was on PS4. The second time was on Xbox because it's on Game Pass. So I was like, I could just re-download my PS4 version, or I could get extra achievements and just play on Xbox.
Oh, very smart.
But it's funny because you mentioned the less in detail on the Switch version, Anna, and I noticed playing because I have an Xbox One X, and I noticed the textures were a lot rougher than I remember even on that.
Really?
Like, yeah, because I was scanning the books again and stuff, and certain like character models and some sequences, I was just like, ooh, wow, like, did it look that rough before? Like, like it was 3 years ago, I guess, but so I think that's just kind of across the board, really.
Yeah, I think like certainly some of the animation, some of the hands, even on PC, it's like, okay, things are kind of clipping through. It didn't look as rough as I was scared of, though. I was scared this game was going to feel a lot jankier than I remembered it, but I actually thought stuff was pretty smooth. Even some of the more complex animations, like, okay, this feels all right overall.
Yeah, nothing crashed for me on either version, so
you're very lucky. Jacob, how'd it go?
Yeah, I played on my PC. It was fine. Once I had to restart because as a shark, I got caught on a tree and I couldn't get off. But that wasn't a crash. Maybe it was my fault. But otherwise, it ran fine. I think this game is gorgeous stylistically, and that held up super well. So maybe the textures were a little iffy, but like mostly I was still pretty impressed with how everything looked.
Yeah. Marcus, did you play Unfinished Swan then?
Yeah. That was on PS3 back in like 2012, I think it was. Yeah, I played through that whole game, and I like Edith Finch more. Like I remember liking Unfinished Swan a lot, but not like loving it. Like I like the like just the paint mechanic of that thing. It could give you a headache after a while, I remember, because you're staring at a lot of just bright white
right,
for long periods of time until you throw stuff. But yeah, I think I reviewed that too, actually, now that I think about it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, playing through this game again, I loved it so much. And I was like, God, do I need to go back to Unfinished Swan? Because I started it, but now I'm second guessing myself. Like, is that game secretly as brilliant as Edith Finch? Do you think if you're a huge fan of Edith Finch, like you should go back and play Unfinished Swan? Yeah,
absolutely. Especially, well, one, because there's a little bit of a connection between the two games. But like I said, I think Unfinished Swan is a really cool thing, a really creative one of those, I guess we'll say, with the paint stuff. And I think I think the soundtrack in both games are phenomenal. And I think if you're a fan of this, I think Unfinished Swan is totally worth going back to.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So mentioned Giant Sparrow is the developer. Forrest Lastman wrote in saying that he likes to do research on the developers who worked on these games, and he notes that Ian Dallas is the creative director. He worked as a writer for The Onion and a few TV shows before going into game design. After working as a tester and briefly at Telltale as a writer on MinnMax Season 2, he helped found Giant Sparrow in 2009, where he served as creative director for both of their games. And then he dedicated the game to his mom, which is a nice note at the end of the game there. I went back on Giant Sparrow's website, and they have an awesome prototype video of like when they got the green light from Sony at the time, who's the original publisher for What Remains of Edith Finch. But they have this prototype video that's just like a minute and a half long, and it has very little in common with the finished game, but just kind of is them exploring their ideas. And it's fascinating to look at because there's just weird shots of like this trailer home in the water, and you walk up to it and then it like sprouts giant legs and walks away. Or there's this awesome shot of walking into a room and there's books, which, there's plenty of books in the finished game too, but there's books piled up and there's a bunch of books pouring out of the fireplace like it's it's like it's puking out books, or the books are like just lava being pushed out of the fireplace. It's such a cool vibe. But this game completely came out of the blue for me. But Marcus, were you looking forward to it, like as a fan of Unfinished Swan?
Yeah, I've been following it because I think they announced it like a couple years before it came out, and it had a much like more horror vibe to it. Like along the way, they changed it. Like I think I remember reading the original name was like The Nightmare of Edith Finch or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
But it kind of like I think along the way they softened it up and made it a bit more eerie than straight up horror. Which I actually prefer, honestly, because I remember playing it the first time and just kind of expecting something really spooky to happen the whole time, and it kind of like, even though I loved exploring that house and it's one of the best lived in spaces I've ever been in, but I was just kind of like on edge a little bit too, like, okay, what's gonna happen here, right? Like it's a similar feeling of playing Gone Home actually the first time. Like I kept waiting for like, there's a ghost in here, right? Or something.
Yeah, because I remember listening to Idle Thumbs and they were joking about with Gone Home about the idea of there being a ghost in there somewhere. So I was totally waiting for that. But Andrew Vala wrote in and he's with you. He says, I immediately felt a sense of dread in this game that never went away. I played the entire game expecting either the house to be actively trying to murder me or a quote unquote missing family member to be skulking around the premises. Was this intended at all, or was I bringing in external biases against a creepy abandoned house?
No, I mean, she says, like, before you even enter the house, she's like, I was afraid of this place. She was like, when I was a kid, I didn't really know what the name was, but now I can name it. I'm scared of this place. So I think they definitely knew what they were doing. And I also feel like this game definitely... They played Gone Home. I would guess. I would wager. And so, like, you know, they knew that kind of had a horror vibe going into it. And so I think they were even playing with that expectation a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the whole anvil hanging over your head feeling really mirrors what the family's going through with this curse. Is that, like the family, we sort of don't know what's going to happen. There's just this general looming feeling that something could happen, but we don't know when or where.
Right. It could end with just a guillotine. Well, I guess that's the wrong example to use. An anvil falling on Edith Finch's head and like, all right, that's the end of her story. You just never know if there's a jump scare coming. And there was a Reddit AMA with Giant Sparrow where somebody, it was right as the game was launching, and somebody asked him like, hey, is this game scary? If I don't like scary games, should I play this? And he's like, I guess people say it's scary, but we're not intending for it to be scary. It's kind of just in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But it would have been such a different game if they just would have included... Well, actually, now I'm thinking about it. Say if they included a jump scare. But I guess Barbara's section, is there technically a jump scare, like with the boyfriend in the basement?
Yeah, I mean, he pops out of the fridge. It's not it's not too frightening, but it does happen.
It's like the closest thing that game comes to that, I guess.
Yeah.
I actually liked playing this more the second time, knowing that it wasn't going to be that, because it like let me relax a little bit more. Like I love horror games. Like I'm not like a wimp or anything, but it was more like, instead of being like, okay, what's the spooky thing that's going to pop out and get me? It was more like, oh, this is beautiful, but also really sad at the same time. Like instead of feeling like dread, I just kind of felt sad going through the rooms. Not, like just really appreciating, man, this family, like most of them seem all right. And, like just really kind of lamenting all of their downfalls,
Yeah. IanTClark writes and he says, this game was designed for multiple playthroughs. There are so many little details that you would only notice after you finish the whole game. I'll only name two. At the opening of the game, when you're on the ferry and you look down at Edith's diary, the hands don't have gloves. I would not have known that you're seeing this through the eyes of her son had I not completed the full story, which I did not pick up on at all. That's amazing. Later, when you've made your way through inside of the house as Edith, you can see that the stairway railing is fixed rather poorly from when Barbara's attacker fell in 1960.
I did not notice that.
Yeah, those little details are awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, like, in a sense, this game is chock full of sort of little Easter eggs like that. But I think it brings to attention how it's just detailed world building to me. Like, it's really taking in the history of the full family and, like, what's happened there and building it into the spaces that we walk in throughout the game.
Yeah, I can't imagine developing this game and just going through pass after pass of like, how many other little tidbits can we put here? Like, oh, this would connect to this, and then this. And even if you pack a house full of fun connections between all the family members, it still needs to like read to the player and have an unfolding story. And I'm trying to figure out to what level is it just we're going to pack this thing full of details versus first you learn this, then you learn this, then you learn this. And I think a lot more of it is the latter than we think.
I think this more than it feels like you're kind of organically exploring, but there is only one path through. Like you can't experience the stories in any order. And I remember on my initial playthrough, I kind of felt like I could, I didn't know. I just felt like I was stumbling into these things. And it's like, oh my gosh, here's another journal or whatever, and I'll read this. But on second playthrough, it's like, oh no, there is a really defined order that you have to go through all of these things. And so it has this really nice line of, even though it's a walking simulator, which can often feel super linear, for whatever reason, this feels way more exploration-y and kind of like you're finding your own path than a lot of similar titles.
Yeah, I guess so. I had a weird experience with the first game, or so the first time I played it, where I got back into the office and was talking about it with folks, and everyone's talking about like, oh, what's your favorite chapter or what's your favorite family member? And everyone was like, oh, Lewis is by far. And I was like, Lewis, which one is that? They're like, the Cannery. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Somehow I completely skipped Lewis's section the first time I played the game, which playing through it this time, I'm like, I don't even know how that's possible.
You can skip through Gus's as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I accidentally did.
Yeah, I could. That was Gus's was the only one where I looked at it and I didn't remember. I was like, oh, I didn't realize Gregory and Gus's were right next to each other. But yeah, that was the only one I looked at. I was like, this seems like I could skip this because they're not really throwing it at me. Like I'm only doing it because it's here, but I didn't think you could skip Lewis. That seems insane to me.
Yeah, that's very weird.
Yeah, that's like 50% of the game. If you're talking like assets and music and stuff, to just be like, nah.
And I don't know if they intended it, but like to me, that is the centerpiece of that game, is that sequence.
I think it is. I think it's the best chapter. Is everybody in agreement that Lewis's is the highlight?
That or Molly's.
Molly's, interesting.
I've got some other faves as well, but I mean, Lewis's is like the climax.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Michael Newman has a point that ties into what you're saying, Jacob. He says, I love a lot about this game. I bought it on a whim on Switch about half a year ago after hearing about it for years without knowing what it really was. The thing that really stands out to me with the opening of the game is that it gives you the stereotypical video game choice of taking the high road or the low road. No matter how many times I play this game, I always take the low road. My side questing nature really gets the best of me. But Edith Finch quickly teaches you that all the paths lead to the same place, which I think is a neat little metaphor for the game as a whole. All the branches lead to the same place and are equally as important in getting you to the ending.
Yeah. It's funny because there's an achievement for taking both paths to the house.
Oh, is there really?
Yeah.
I like the idea of looking at achievements for Edith Finch.
Yeah, right. If you're achievement hunting Edith Finch.
You got to swing over that branch in 4 swings or less.
Yeah, I mean, there is some, like I got the one for the baby, like knocking all the letters into the pool in the tub. There's an achievement for that.
That's so nuts.
But yeah, I always take the low road too, just because like I think I have the same mentality of like, oh, clearly the high road's the way to go. So I'm going to go down here and see if there's extra stuff, which there's like, there's no collectibles or anything in this game. It's more like visual stuff. Like, did everybody go down
Yeah.
the lower road?
I went the low road, but then I actually like did a circle and went back up to the beginning. And so I saw the deer on the high road when you walk from the house back to where you enter. So I sort of did like a loop and then went back to the house.
Okay. I didn't know.
I did the high road just because the other 3 times I've played it, I always took the low road. And so it's like, I'm going to be different.
Did you see a deer heading that direction towards? Okay.
Mm-hmm. See, I think the first time I took the low road, and then this time I forgot I did that. And then instinctively like, whoa, low road, that's the way to go. The only thing, like little detail that's down there is that there's the little waterfall that has like a bunch of the missing posters for Milton.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like they're all just there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most you see them in the game. Like they're all kind of spread out, but there's like a ton of them down there.
That's so weird. It's like the
I don't know
dumping
what that
ground.
says.
Yeah. Or then you see the dragon down there as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Bob Buel writes in. He says the level of tragic detail in this game is what really stuck with me the most. Like the missing posters for Milton everywhere, including gobs of them in the river by the woods, or the crutch that belonged to Barbara's boyfriend is now hanging on the wall in Walter's bunker. Or the fact that Sven's death date, where it's told he died building the dragon slide, is the same as Walter's birthday, so you can assume he died building the present. But the one that hit me the most emotionally was when you go into the twins, Sam and Kelvin's room. Before you know their fates or anything that becomes of them, you see their childhood door with childishly drawn marks showing their heights growing throughout the years. Sam's goes up and up and up throughout the years, but Kelvin's just stops about a third of the way up the door. This was such a punch to the gut, knowing something awful happened before anything else in the game had even hinted at it. Thanks for the powerful game, and I didn't vote for it, but I'm glad that the community chose this for the deepest dive. Thanks, Bob.
I think one of the biggest strengths of this, and definitely the most striking thing when I first walked into the house, was like the density of just everything in the house is on just another level. Like, I don't think I've ever, there are lots of games that you exploring houses, and usually they're interesting, but I think kind of because they're not married to like letting you pick up every object or something, it's like it is just so crammed full of crap. And like the kitchen has like stacks of pots and books and Chinese food, like so much that you almost can't see to the other side of the room. And those are just like, that's in the kitchen, but like every room has so much stuff on the walls that are all telling little things. But really it's just like the amount of stuff is what stands out to me about like the design of the house. And I still don't feel like I've seen anything like it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Now, I'm no technical maestro, but like I wonder if they can put more objects in the world because you can't really interact with them too much. Like if they pack all that stuff in there and allow you to haul it around source style, if that would just be too much for the RAM to hold or something techie like that, and that accounts for just the level of detail they're able to pack into this thing.
Yeah, like they don't have to run physics simulations on the books or whatever.
Right.
I don't think it needs that, because honestly, like Edith's narration is good enough. Like you walk into a room, she'll just say like, hey, everything's still the same from when we up and left that one night.
Yeah.
And you look around like, oh yeah, like I totally get that vibe. Like this looks like everyone here just vanished in an instant as they were eating or something.
Interestingly enough, though, although I appreciated Edith's narration because I felt like it showed us what she was paying attention to and what she saw, and I think that's really central to the storytelling, is that we remember that it's being mediated by the last living Finch, who also happens to be a pregnant woman. It did make me pay attention to more aspects. It made me pay attention to certain parts of the house more than others. And so I would be interested in playing again and paying less attention to where Edith is looking and just looking around more. Because it definitely draws your eyes to specific parts of the room. And so it definitely guides like what tidbits of the story you get. And I think that is also interesting, but then you can like look and learn more like the door post or the height marking post.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does like such an amazing job too of, you think it'd be really jarring for when they do kind of grab your camera to be like, look at the text over here, but it's always so smooth. Like if you're not looking in that direction, I don't know how many layers they had to go through or just waves of iteration to make sure that that's like a very natural swoop to just kind of guide you very subtly in the right direction.
Yeah,
I have a weird like poetic-y thesis about just that camera move that I was like thinking about last night, because it's like a lot of times it would happen that I wanted to look around a room and Edith would say something and it was like, no, look at this, this thing on the wall or whatever.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like you can't escape the history here or whatever. It's like, we're not a passive observer. Like Edith has like a lot of feelings about the things in the house. And so while Jacob, just want to go and wander around and be like, what's over here? She's like, I can't ignore this thing over here. And like, as the game, I'm going to like make you look at it.
Yeah. Well, and just to piggyback on that, I think what really struck me about this game is that video games as a medium tend to privilege exploration and freedom. But with the first peepholes, and when you look into the locked doors for the first time, for me, it was almost the game telling me like, you are looking into this family's world. You are not, again, like you are not given like unlimited realm under it. You're just like a passive observer.
Yeah. Noah Berman mentions that Edith narrator's brilliant brilliant visualization of these gruesome deaths shows that she's just as cursed as the rest of them, that she's also just obsessed with these stories. Yeah, we are very much locked in her eyes.
So I would say, like, has anyone wondered, like, all those vignettes, is that her imagining how their deaths went down, or was it like an actual like, okay, this is you're now transported to that time and this is exactly what happened. You know, it's because I mean it's still kind of vague, and which I appreciate about this game is that they never definitely show what happened to the family. It's kind of, you know, some are clearer than others. But,
well, the game starts off, we're reading her retelling of these stories, right? We're reading her journal. And so in a sense, like at the end of the game, there's this really poignant quote about, I don't know if we told these stories or if these stories made us into this curse, almost like if they created this curse. And I think that she is probably asking herself the same question, like, is this what happened, or am I creating something that didn't exist? And so I think it's like a gray area, right? But in my opinion, I think that we are hearing these stories through her because we're reading her journal, or we're experiencing her son reading her journal.
Yeah. I think the like mythologized aspects of these deaths are kind of like the most important part of it, and also where kind of like the insidious part of the story comes in, because it's like on one level it's just like, boy, these people all died in crazy ways, like what a wacky family. But I think you see, and she says more and more explicitly throughout it, it's like what's the grandma's name? Edie, Edie was like so encouraging of like, isn't it spooky that like your sister was killed by a monster or whatever, that like she's making it more part of like the family mythos in this kind of like hyperbolized way. Whereas if they actually talked about like, no, it's messed up, your you know, uncle drowned in a bathtub, then maybe it wouldn't be so they wouldn't have such an attachment to it. You know, it seems like she's kind of like self-fulfilling the prophecy.
Yeah, because it made me wonder, like, I remember the first time, like, maybe there is something supernatural at play. That's crazy bunch of coincidences. But that line you mentioned on it, where she starts to say, like, you know, maybe we keep talking about this so much that we're making it real, and that maybe it's, you know, it's crazy, but maybe it is just all in our heads. And like, if it's like a law of attraction thing, like, well, if we keep thinking it's going to happen, then it's probably going to happen, especially like over generations and multiple people. And, you know, Edie to me kind of gets that from, was it Odin, the like patriarch, I guess, the guy. I mean, he literally moved his house on a boat because
those shots are so awesome
of dying. So I can kind of see where she gets it from if he believes in it that strongly. I know we got to put our house on a boat and then hopefully nothing happens here.
Yeah, so there's like there's those things that like you can't divorce from, like trying to figure out how much is in reality versus just this family mythology. And, you know, you could always play that what we're seeing isn't correct either. But like the house in and of itself is so bonkers. And the fact that you see the house, the original old house, like sunk out in the water and stuff, like it already is a fantastical world, even, you know, set aside the mythology and the, you know, reenactments that you actually get to play through here.
Yeah, it's a cool house. I want to live in that house.
Oh, we all want to live in that house.
I do not.
The one that's not underwater.
I'll take the underwater one. That's fine. Anthony Brown has the poignant point that, hey, this is so sad. I don't like feeling this sad. Joe Dean says he cries every time that he plays this game, and he's wondering how emotional we got playing through it here.
I think for me, it was really emotional because, you know, in addition to the sort of mythology aspect, there is a part of it that's very real. And I play this game, and for me, it's about generational trauma and how a family is struggling to heal after loss. And they're still grappling with that, even as like the last family member is alive, and Edith's still grappling with that. And so for me, it's at points it's disturbing, veering on just like heartbreaking.
I feel like this time I felt the character that made me the most sad was actually Dawn, Edith's mom.
Oh, interesting.
Because she spends a lot of the game talking about like, oh, she's always trying to keep this secret from me, and she's super paranoid, and Edith kind of sounds resentful of that. Like, oh, why didn't she tell me about this? And then as you learn more and more about like, you know, how she lost like her father and her brothers, and then when learning about the history of her family, like this time I kind of empathize with her a bit more, and Edith starts to too as the game goes on, but more so than I did the first time. Of like Dawn's had a really rough go of like maybe more so than any other family member, because she's kind of like smack dab right in the middle of like, she's young enough to have been around for the older generation, but young enough to have her own kids and see them die one by one. And then the losing her father was the one that got me the most. Sam, the army guy, because his death is probably the most Final Destination wacky. It's so random, and I actually forgotten about it playing it again.
Same here.
So it got me twice. But this time, just I feel like that is the turning point for her, because I think she blames herself for that, because I feel like if she in her head thinks if I had been a better shot, that deer would have just died instantly. And, but the reason I did it wasn't because I was super hesitant about not wanting to go on the strip, which is what he really liked. And, maybe if I was more gung ho about it, I would have killed that thing, shot to the head, done, and he would have been bucked off.
Yeah. Well, and now that I hear you say that, I do empathize with Dawn in that she was probably thinking about taking responsibility for what was happening. And she probably felt guilty, and that she felt responsible for her son's deaths as well, in addition to her father's.
Yeah, I'm trying to walk through the deaths here and how many of them are caused by somebody else in the family. And it's that weird thing of, it's definitely a spectrum of some are more direct than others, but it's I guess all of them you can tie into in some way because of the family's connections or their relationships that this death has sparked from it, right?
Yeah, I think
maybe Dawn.
Go ahead.
No, it's just because Dawn gets sick, so I guess hers is probably the most
right.
That could just happen. The Sanjay count.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorites, maybe my underrated fave family death is
Jacob Geller's top 5 deaths.
Number 3 won't surprise you.
is Walter, who's the one in the bunker under the house. His story is just one of my favorites, and I think it's so kind of compellingly told because he you see him get better. Which is kind of the heartbreaking thing is most of them, they die no one deserves to die because they're stubborn or whatever, but it's kind of a loose morality tale. But his is I've been down here for so long, I am going to take control of my life. And he writes this really beautiful letter that you're hearing the whole time, and then steps outside and gets hit by a train, which feels like the most maybe mean-spirited one in the game. He did nothing to deserve it. He was just doing good and then gets hit by a train. But I also think that story kind of represents the tone of this game, where it's not just, I feel if you told me, here's a really thoughtful game, it's about the death of 14 people or whatever, I'd be that sounds miserable. That sounds like a slog that I don't want to play through. But this isn't that. It has a lot of moments of kind of hopefulness and levity and things that get you through the game more easily than if it was just devastating the entire time.
I agree. It's such a tough tone because playing through it this time, it's well, I kind of have a dark sense of humor, but this game is funny, right? I'm not, it's not that, I'm not saying it's a comedy overall, but that's one of the things I love about it. It does have that lighthearted nature, and I don't know if that's just a macabre sense of humor.
No, I get that. The probably the saddest one is probably the baby that drowns in the tub, but that sequence is the sequence itself is fun as hell, at least to me. I was jumping around with the frog and stuff like that. I enjoyed it the second time where I was man, this actually feels nice to just jump up here. I'm gonna knock this thing in the tub. I'm having a great time here, knowing what's coming. So yeah, that is a really tricky tightrope to walk of being this is just about people dying constantly and often horrible ways, but yeah, it never feels like it's a drag the entire time in a weird way, because those moments are so lighthearted.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Edith Finch brings such a love to storytelling in its many forms that love is apparent in all of these stories. So whether it's in the comic book style of Barbara or the flip book style of Milton or the photographs of Sam, we see the love for all these storytelling mediums in those stories because they're so thoughtfully presented. And so I think for me, that also took I guess the edge off of death.
it makes you excited, or at least for me, to see the next one because of how different they all are.
Yeah.
Like, I remember every time I was like, okay, what are they going to do next? Like, none of them are the same.
I feel like that really ties into. Also, I want to reference a lot of the thoughts that I have are influenced by people. Probably say this in the comments. Joseph Anderson, who's a big video essayist YouTube person, has a great video called "The Villain of Edith Finch" that kind of has his idea on it. I think it's a great piece, but I think the game making them fun is also doing that thing of like you want to be kind of on Edie's side, which is like the deaths are fun and quirky and they're cool to hear about. And I think the kind of like the final nail in that coffin or whatever is when you're hearing her last story of like, the tide went out and I was about to go to the sunken house, and you're so excited to see what's in that house. And then your mom drags you out of there and you're like, we're leaving. This place is toxic. Like, this isn't good for you. And it's like, it's interesting to be just like, you want to see so bad what happened in this death, but instead you're being like taken out because you shouldn't actually be fixating on all this so much.
Yeah. By the way, Jacob, going against everything I was saying earlier, do you want to turn down your mic like 10%?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Taylor Owens writes in and he says, I was so excited for this game and I played it the day that it came out and I absolutely loathed it. If you make a 2-hour montage of a bunch of people, many of them children, randomly dying, you better have something to say. I might have forgiven the flagrant abuse of similes in the narration, but the deaths stack up so quickly while being so imaginatively morbid, it begins to feel obscene. And he says that Everybody's Gone to the Rapture plays with similar themes, but in a much smarter way overall. And that's an interesting take from Taylor. Like, I forced my friend Ronnie to play this game a couple months ago. And he had a similar take. He was like, I liked it, but I don't know what it's adding up to. I don't know what the takeaway is here. Like, what is the conclusion I should have after seeing all these interesting vignettes?
Yeah, it's funny because right before he invited me to do this, one of my best friends played it for the first time, and we were texting, and he's like, he played this and Gone Home at the same time. He's like, I love Gone Home, but this, I don't know what this is saying exactly. Like, he's like, what is the moral here? And I was like, I was like, that's, at least for, like, I've never really landed on like a single like sentence moral, like, well, you know, beware of blah blah blah. It's always been, it's just been more just the idea of like what it would be like to live in this family, knowing that death is just a regular occurrence, and like the different ways the family members cope with that, and like not death in the normal sense of like we're all gonna die, but like no, you're all gonna die probably pretty young and probably in some messed up way, and that's just how this works and how each of them deal with that. And like putting myself in that situation, like how would you value life? How would you go about life knowing that, seeing your loved ones drop like flies constantly?
Yeah. Well, I think, Anna, you hit on it earlier, where I think that idea of family trauma and how much do you bring forth the next generation, whether you want to or not, seems to be the big picture theme here.
Yeah. Well, and I think something to note when we're having this conversation of like, what is the moral or lesson from Edith Finch? I think that like in this sort of desire to derive meaning out of like every connection and every book on the wall, we can get lost in like the experience of it, which is like, it just there might not be a clear lesson. And that I think what makes Edith Finch so effective as a game and in its storytelling is that it is sort of like postmodern. And what I mean by that is it's not linear, right? We don't have like a central character who is getting better and then like there's a rising climax and they, you know, like defeat something. Like sometimes life just happens. And that's what I like about this, is it is kind of like cyclical. It's generational and it's very different storytelling for video games as a medium, because so many video games, it's about leveling up and beating the final boss. And for this, it's like, we don't get to see that final story. We just get to see this world. Yeah,
absolutely. Jacob L says, I've only played it once, but what remains of Edith Finch has stuck with me more than any grandiose video game story I've ever played. I believe the length goes a long way in making this story stick. It's stunning how such a beautiful little story is told in such little time. Yeah, I do think that is important. And it's that weird thing, we're playing through all these vignettes. It's like, maybe this isn't true, but in my mind, it's like, man, if this game came out 5 years earlier, they would have tried to pack in and make these vignettes maybe 4 times as long. But I think they stay for just the right amount of time. You get the idea, you get the new mechanics. I'm sure they're a nightmare to produce all these different vignettes and gameplay styles, and then they just move on. And I think it's so smart to keep things moving instead of finding 6 collectibles in the bathtub.
Yeah, I agree. Also, if you want to spend more time with the game, you can. And you can look around the house and really take in those little details. And it's really on the player, and it's still respectful to the player's time, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, I say this as someone who loves walking simulators, big Dear Esther fan, big Everybody's Gone to the Rapture fan, etc. But this game is really made in a response to kind of the derogatory things that people say about those games, or they say like, I don't want to play a 2-hour game where you just like hold forward the whole time. Mm-hmm. And so I think if Edith Finch wouldn't have come out 5 years earlier, or if it did, it would look totally different, because this is about using what that genre is good at, which is a really self-contained, like specific story, while also, kind of like putting in variety and kind of like gameplay interest, for lack of a better term, to kind of like, I don't know, maybe fool people who aren't as interested in the genre, or like it has everything that is good about walking simulators, but also a little more gaminess than that genre usually has.
Yeah, some fun, like in the bathtub. It's a hoot.
Yeah. That frog jumps real high.
Christian Haynes has a similar thought. He says, this game released shortly after my mother passed away from breast cancer. My mother's passing was unexpected. My response to it was to avoid thinking about death, to plunge myself into my work, and to seal off my memory from consciousness. Playing What Remains of Edith Finch compelled me to work through my grief. The combination of a meditative pace, an absence of fail states, and a series of complex perspectives on death allowed me to dwell on my loss. It was my first quote-unquote walking simulator, and it allowed me to see that games might be less about progression or leveling up and more about enriching the textures of our emotional life. The lack of many conventional gameplay mechanics is a feature of these kinds of games because they free up our attention to focus on the essential experience, grief, loss that the game's trying to convey. I wonder if the criticism of walking simulators is a denial of emotional life in the name of a kind of toxic macho gamer culture, but that's another story. Well said, Christian. Prestonacron says, I call this kind of game a what happened here game. In games like this, where you walk around empty houses, towns, or islands and read diary entries, notes, and other fragments of the lives of the people long gone, try to figure out, quote, what happened here? The pacing of these games is often very slow and there's a lot of decorum. This is so that the player can focus on the sad narrative and wonder, what happened here? Although I like this style of games, I have a few improvements I'd like to run past you and the gang. I'd like to have a shift in focus from narrative to combat, crafting, waves of zombies, and online elements so you don't feel so lonely when playing, and all the internal monologues should be voiced by Tro Baker. Yeah, we're with you, Presto. They need to fix this game. Maybe they can patch
it. We need a walking simulator. We need a walking simulator where you explore a house that you just purchased that's unfurnished and has no history, and you're just walking around trying to figure out how you're going to mess it up.
I think about this way too much, but back at Game Informer, we did a cover story on Tacoma, and Tim must have been gone at that point. Tim Turry, I think he was at Capcom, but I remember him saying that if we ever did a cover story at Game Informer with Fulbright, the developers have gone home again, that we should prepare it so that they all leave the studio. And then the writers go in for the cover story and they have to rummage through everything and read all their emails and piece together the cover story from rummaging around their studio. And I can't get it out of my head.
Well, that actually brings up an interesting point with Edith Finch, though, is like, what stories are we not seeing? Like, what stories do you not get when you're just looking at the objects, and what goes unsaid with this way of storytelling? Like, the game is not about us living with the family. So when they're alive, so there's a lot that we don't get. And so what is remembered and what's forgotten is just like, I think there's an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, like if the best DLC possible for this game would be just a long sequence of all the family members eating Chinese food and talking about their days.
God, I thought you were going to say, like, we need like a pack of 5 more family members to kill.
Oh God.
But I actually had a even like a little tiny meta narrative I had in my head just looking around was going into, I think it was the living room, and there's like their little big TV, they had like a flat screen in there, and it was supported entirely by just a stack of random books. And to me, I looked at that, I was like, oh, I guess like this entire house is almost made out of books. So like I can't see them watching much TV, and I feel like that kind of shows they can't even be bothered to mount this properly. They're like, I don't know, just throw it on top of these books because somebody decided to get a TV, but maybe.
Right.
Yeah. You know what would be really cool is to see an archaeologist play Edith Finch and see what they make of it, and like walk around the house and like, I don't know, analyze it.
Yeah. Ooh, and then put them together with an architect.
Yeah, I was going to say I am constantly talking about architecture in my writing and stuff, and I think that it's cool that there's never really a line that's like, boy, our house sure is crazy looking, huh? Maybe because she says that she's kind of scared of it or whatever, but like the fact that it's not really commented on, that there are tens of thousands of books everywhere in the house, and that there is a boat on stilts above the attic that someone lived in, that like that is not part of the spoken story, but is totally part of kind of the family's history, and you can take more from that house than what you're being like literally told. Is one of my favorite parts of it, and just seeing the way that this must have been developed, because you can't see a house like that without thinking like, how the hell did they get that boat up there? And then that becomes part of the family mythology.
The only line that they pay to that is like when they mention like having to expand the rooms because Edie refused to just repurpose the existing rooms. So they're like, well, we're just gonna keep adding as more people get born. And like, so to me, that kind of shows like as times goes on, like, the house gets crazier and more just structurally unsound the more family members there are. And that kind of shows like over time, the family more and more starts to break down as these deaths start to wear on them. You can even see it just visually looking at the house. Like the latest generation has like the shakiest foundation of the house. So
that's such an obvious thing that I had not thought about yet, Marcus.
Yeah.
Let's see. In terms of things that are commented on a little bit, Christopher Reardon says, did anyone else, wait. Oh, did that pink shag carpet in Edie's bathroom give anyone else major anxiety?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Really?
I even noticed it.
Oh my God, it was all I could think about.
It's just like pink carpeting and the toilet's pink. There's this one bathroom and they have a line explaining what it is. It's like some girlfriend or a wife designed. I forget what
like
the line
ex-wife.
is.
It was
Sorry,
like that's the only trace of this ex-wife in the house, but she made an impression.
Right.
Like,
I mean, I definitely thought about how gross that idea of that thick carpeting in a bathroom would grow to be over time.
Can I ask you, while we're on weird specifics, I have something that I want to ask you guys about. So when you see the family member's story and then Edith kind of like colors it in her journal, or she draws a picture of them, and Milton, who's the one who disappears, and he, like in the flip book, his picture is a cartoon character, and everyone else is like a kind of normal portrait of a person. Do you have a theory on why? Because I don't, other than he did art.
I have one. So am I the only one that played Unfinished Swan? Anyone else play it?
Didn't finish it, no.
Okay, so Milton specifically is like a connection to Unfinished Swans. I remember the first time I played it, I remember when you go to his room and you see his doormat has the little crown with the mustache on it. And I remember looking at that, like, that looks really familiar. And you go in there and you see the black ink paintings everywhere. And all of that is like Unfinished Swan stuff. Like there's one picture in particular of like a frog or something. And I remember seeing that art in Unfinished Swan, like in like one of the promotional materials. And the idea, and his story is like, he found a magic brush and then opened a portal and disappeared. And I remember at the time thinking like, wait, is he supposed to be the kid that's the protagonist of the Unfinished Swan? That like, are you saying that they exist in the same universe? And I remember looking it up like, no, that kid's name was Monroe, but the antagonist of that game is this king who rules the paint world, and Monroe meets, and his deal is that, he had his kingdom, but then all of his subjects left because he eventually was like incompetent and complacent, so they all abandoned him. So he got lonely and painted his own wife and had kids and got married, but then that all went to hell. And like looking at a picture, if you look up a picture of the king in that game and look at kid Milton, they look very similar. So it's like, did Milton go to that world and then just live there for the rest of his life and become this king? Because he has a crown in his drawing too.
Yeah.
So I was like, this, like, just looking at that room, I was like, this is clearly Unfinished Swan stuff.
Right. Yeah. Simrith Carr wrote in about that same fact. And she said that on a Reddit AMA, that Giant Sparrow did say that it does connect to that. But I mean, that brings up that question again about like, okay, so what are we supposed to believe actually happened here? Or does it matter? Like that he just disappeared into his drawings, but then I don't know.
Because if that happened, which seems like it, does that mean we can, if that supernatural thing happened, can we believe that there's an actual curse with this family?
Or is it just, I mean, don't be so literal about it. It's just another game that's pulling inspiration from that, and it's fun to connect those dots. But then Milton just was so absorbed in his art that who knows?
I think it's not giving us a literal answer because it wants us to think about it in terms of metaphor. Like it wants to push us into the kind of like, what does this mean more than what actually happened?
Right. What year did Milton die? Does anyone remember?
Oh God.
It was like post 2010, right?
Well, I guess he doesn't have a death date.
Yes, that's true.
But
basically, did he play the Unfinished Swan in their universe to become a mega fan?
Guaranteed.
His life.
I did see a PS3 in his room, so yeah, that's probably.
Yeah.
There was a line at the end of the Milton section where she says, "Whatever Milton found in the house, Mom didn't want it getting out." I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, honestly, that's what I thought. Lines like that led me to believe that there was going to be some sort of big reveal, right? So as far as Milton goes, I mean, I have no idea what that, again.
found a link to the PlayStation Store to buy Unfinished Swan.
Hey, there we go. But I mean, I maybe have to play through it again just to see where that line fits. But is there something as dark maybe of Milton finding some dark family secrets and that the mom took him out? Or, I mean, is that insane?
Yeah. I honestly thought it was the door. Like, if we're going with the, like, no, this Unfinished Swan exists in this world, I thought maybe he did find the actual door to that universe. And
interesting.
She found out and was like, nope, seal this up.
There's also, I mean, the mom clearly doesn't want Edith in, like, Edie's library and doesn't want her to read that thing, which might be just stop listening to these stories, but there also might be something specific in that story that she didn't want her to know. I don't know. Again, I think they didn't give us the literal answer on purpose.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think about.
Yeah. Mattress Monkey also loves Unfinished Swan and wrote in about that fun connection. Daniel Dwiggins says, as much as I love the entirety of the Finch house, I got to hand the best room aboard to Milton for sure. The pulley elevator in the middle to go up to the observatory area is absolutely amazing. But also, I think that Milton's disappearance hit me the most out of all of them. No explanation for the family, no trace of what might have happened to him on the surface, but the fact that he still might be living out a life in a world that he had dreamt up still gives me a sense of hope that he's happy. Plus, I think the music that plays in his room is one of the best tracks in the whole game. Thanks for playing and what turned out to be one of the most touching gaming experiences I've ever had. Wow.
Yeah, I believe that track is from Unfinished Swan too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I was like, that sounds super familiar.
Yeah. All right, I gotta go play that.
Am I the only person who was playing through this and was like, oh, it looks like Extreme Makeover Home Edition came through and made, it's like, when you watch that show and the kids like time it's like, I like horses, and they're like, great, we bought you an entire horse farm and you're
it's like, you made a mistake. You said it's the exhibit.
The Pimp My Ride problem.
Edith's room, like, to get to Edith's bed, you literally have to climb a climbing wall, which is like,
that's awesome.
Is super cool. But also, it's like, can you imagine just like well, we've had this up here for 3 years, and I still have to climb this climbing wall every time I want to go to bed.
I like that she mentions that, like, the first time you get onto the roof when she's talking about her mom, she's like, if my mom had mentioned there'd be this much climbing getting around here, I would not have come since I'm 22 weeks pregnant.
Well, that's also the first, like, it's interesting. Playing through it again, there are a lot of lines that hint that she's pregnant before she says that, but when, at least on my first playthrough, that was the first time where I was like, oh my God. And she says that as she's teetering across a branch like 20 feet above the ground.
And they put like cracking sounds in the branch right after that too. It's like, it's diabolical.
But you can see, you can learn that at the beginning. If you just look down, you see her baby bump. Like it's.
Oh, you do? I looked down and I didn't notice, but.
See, I guess, she could also just be like, not super skinny. I saw that, but I wasn't immediately like, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
I guess because maybe the second time playing, like, because I never did that the first time, so that line where she mentions that was like, oh, okay. But like when the first time I got into the house, I just looked down randomly and I was like, oh, like you can see it because it seems pretty spherical and not like she's just kind of heavy. So it's like, oh, like you could, and I looked it up later where they were, like apparently that was kind of like a point of contention with the studio of like, do we just make her an invisible figure like most walking simulators? Because they weren't sure that, do we want to give that away immediately? But they were like, nah, let's just do it. Cause like, let's just like to make it seem as I guess realistic and immersive as possible. And the idea, cause I think it goes with everything else in the game. Like you can discover stuff about the story before it happens, like with the height chart and stuff, if you take the time to look around. So it's kind of like a reward. Like, oh, you look down and you see that she's...
Yeah, but they did block out the mirrors, which was interesting.
That is true, too.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just mirrors are hard in games.
Yeah, that's true. That is...
Also, like, we saw their human faces, like Sam, the grandpa. It's like he's not the best looking character model, so maybe it's just a matter of like,
I did write down something interesting with the character models, which is that like a lot of times you would noticeably like not be Edith in one of the kind of flashbacks. You would be someone else. But the one that I really noticed was in the Lewis chapter. There's like you're making your way through his kingdom, and then there's the kind of flash where you walk up and you see him chopping fish kind of in third person.
Yeah.
But if you look at the shadow that you reflect, you are clearly Lewis's character model because you have like spiky hair like he does. And you never see any part of his body other than that. And I was so struck by them like taking the time to make you a different character model, even though the only indication that you're not just like Edith is the shadow. I just thought it was super cool.
Yeah. Well, and I think it adds complexity to that question, is like that narrative question, which is like, are these the actual stories, or are these the stories as Edith is recounting them to her son?
Yeah.
The game does a lot of cool perspective changes. Did anyone like go for Sam's death, like right before he dies when you're setting up the picture for the two of them?
Yeah.
Did anyone like take forever figuring out that you could move the dad and it wasn't just a selfie? Because it's kind of framed like he's taking a selfie, and I did this the first time too, where I kept trying to focus, but his face would not focus. It would just be her. And I remember just being like, wow, this is messed up. He wants to take a selfie while his daughter's sobbing in the background over his dead deer.
Yeah,
like that's what he's into, I guess. All right.
That was a weird beat of figuring out, okay, I'm actually controlling him. And then the part that I'm embarrassed to say I had to look up a walkthrough for was the part where you had to go all the way to the left to take a picture of him peeing. I took like 1,000 pictures of the lake and the trees. I'm like, what am I missing here? What do you want me to put in focus? And I didn't realize that you could just keep swinging around over there.
Yeah.
Let's see. On that front, Travis Morgan says, I think I was most affected by Sam's story. Even though I knew that each scenario would end with someone passing, I was actually lulled into a sense of security and forgot all about the fact until the damn deer bucked its head. What a great game. Happy I finally played it. Also, I'm not a complete idiot. Dennis M. was with me on that peeing father bit. Joshua Duproy says, I've been playing on my Switch, and I found myself taking a lot of snapshots or using the record button. I managed to take a snapshot just as Sam is startled by the deer and falls off the cliff. As quickly as I took the snapshot, I immediately deleted it from my album even quicker. It just didn't feel right, and that particular death hit me harder than the rest of them for some reason. Probably the sight of Dawn crying after shooting the buck.
Yeah, I think that one stands out for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, because it's like a girl watching her father die, which is horrible, but also because, at least in my mind, it was like, well, he's kind of trying to get his daughter interested in something that she's not super into, but also seemed like a really good dad, just had kind of like good dad on a camping trip energy. And so again, it's that feeling of like, he didn't deserve this. He didn't like have it coming. This is just a mean twist of fate.
Yeah.
It was a good fake out because I think going into that the first time, I think the obvious expectation is like, oh, she's going to shoot him.
100%.
Like she's going to he's going to be out there. Yeah, like that just seemed like the obvious kind of like Twilight Zone ending to that of like, oh, she doesn't want to hunt, so she's going to wind up shooting him somehow. Or
he's going to like get her out to the woods and he's going to be like, start running. You got 10 minutes. We're hunting you. Something silly like that. James Pinto says, there were many points in the game that are certainly dark or sad, but for some reason what got me the most was in Edith's mom's childhood room. There are 3 light switches by the door with Gregory and Gus's switches off and Don's left on. It was heart-wrenching and I still cannot place why. Was there anything that got you all that you weren't expecting? I guess we covered the how much did we cry thing earlier, but yeah, I'm trying to think of other emotional beats that hit you in an unexpected way.
One that I really liked that was kind of in that category of like, we're not hearing this story of when you're in, I guess kind of like Edith's mom's classroom, like really high up in the house or whatever. And there's just a line where there's like a cross kind of on the wall. And Edith is like, I think religion really helped my mom. Mm-hmm. And that's all they say about it. And it's like, that is such not part of this narrative, but gives you this picture of like, she's not just a character in this kind of like turning gear. She's a really traumatized woman who like, obviously would need something to turn to. And also the fact that it was, it didn't have like a big lesson about religion. It didn't kind of moralize about it. It was just like, I think this really helped my mom. Really kind of struck me in a quietly sad sort of way.
Yeah. Another moment that really got me is I think it's just after the classroom and Edith is walking around like that kitchen area. There's a closet with Edith's father, Sanjay's stuff. There's like his Red Cross badge and like an outfit and like an ID. And then a prayer plaque next to it. And it was almost like a little shrine. And interestingly enough, like I had seen that, like I grew up, my grandparents had that same exact prayer plaque in their homes. It's kind of like generic Christian. And so it just like sort of got to me because we're also not hearing that story.
Yeah.
It's interesting because like her mom seems like she goes out of her way to try to either like bury or forget the deaths of all of her family members. But with Sanjay in the classroom, they have like the news article that I assume is how he died about like the earthquake and stuff. And it's like, oh, like there was like emergency workers and there was a big earthquake and a bunch of people died. And then right above it is like his portrait.
That's a really good point. I didn't notice that.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, like I was like, I guess I assume that's how he went. But I was like, that it's interesting that that's the one where she's like, no, I don't want to forget that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like, how does the curse align with people who marry into the family, like what is that?
Right.
Because there was Kay Finch who married in, and she was the one that divorced Sam, and nothing happened to her that we know of, right?
I don't
remember. Their relationship died, I guess. They divorced after the death of Gregory, but that's all you really hear about her.
So I also really liked related to Sanjay in Lewis's room. I don't think I had seen this on previous playthroughs, but there's like an Indian flag kind of above his thing, and Edith says like, I think Lewis was really proud of being Indian. That kind of like helped him feel like something other than from this family, and that was another line of like, in the grand story about his death, you didn't hear anything about that. And so it's like, here's an aspect of this person that's not just how they died. And I think those seem to be the things that kind of hit me the hardest, because seeing those reminds you that they're not just wacky stories that it was like, no, this was a person, and this is why it hurts, is because they had other interest in other things, and they're not just this kind of like fable that you're being told.
Yeah. Brian Paradis says, I've played other walking sim games before, like Gone Home, and I figured that was what I was in for. But then Molly turns into a cat, and my expectations were shattered. I think a great game makes a case for why the story has to be a game and not some other form of media, and I think that is where Edith Finch really shines. Thank you for giving me the chance to play this amazing game that I never would have gotten around to. Thank you so much. Darkfish Day says, in Molly's... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, since we're all colleagues, I really want to ask, her death to me is the most kind of like, what? Because did we all assume that she like either like was poisoned and died? Because she was eating, because I that was always the one I was the least clear on.
Well, Eric Reed writes in about it. He says, I think Molly's hit me the hardest. She was sent to bed without food and ended up eating poisonous holly, hallucinating, and probably dying from dehydration or something. My parents use food withholding as a punishment for me as a child, and is one of the reasons why I'm overweight right now. Seriously, if you're a parent, never under any circumstances punish a child with withholding food. It'll cause lasting damage, says Eric. It's that weird note that it ends on, where it's like, okay, if you want to go fantastical, is she like eating herself at that point? But realistically, I think she just died of starvation, right?
I think it was the berries.
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly enough, my game glitched on Molly's story, and so I replayed it from the beginning, and my boyfriend came in and was sitting next to me, and so I started it from the beginning, and I go and I sort of like, I'm not looking around as much, and I go directly to the poison. He's like, why are you eating the poisonous berries? I was like, oh, like, wait, what? And he's like, why would you eat those? I'm like, I have to progress the story. And he's like, oh, like, well, you know, those are going to kill her.
Oh, okay.
See, I didn't recognize those as poison, because I remember the first time I played, I assumed she starved the first time too, but the second time I was like, okay, she's eating this dried gerbil stuff. Yeah. Then she eats toothpaste, which that's bad. Yeah. And then the berries are kind of the crescendo. I was like, okay, those I was like, I don't know anything about those berries, but like eating random berries, it's probably bad enough on top of eating like a tube of toothpaste. So I was like, that would explain maybe she was hallucinating, because like I was trying to justify like, what did her transforming the animal, like, what does that mean? What is that saying? Is she imagining this, or is she actually going out and hunting? Because I thought at first, like, maybe she's running along the tree trying to catch this bird and she thinks she's a cat. But then once it got to the owl, it's like, okay, maybe she ran out to the field. But then the shark is like, okay, I don't know what's going on anymore.
Right. And then the monster, which that monster is so much cooler to control than I remembered. I love that idea of just like dragging yourself up. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. Also, I love just the small tease too, when you go up the stairs for the first time trying to figure out which room to go in, and you know, you don't really realize that Molly is the only open door, but you see it pretty early on, and it's so smart because like where you're standing right when you come up the stairs, you can see into her room and you just see like the huge tail of the shark through the door. It's like the best way to lure you into like, you're going to say no to this, just go in this room right now, man.
I also love just the little bit of like gamey weirdness of like, even though I said I got stuck on this earlier, when you turn into the shark and it just looks like, you know, it's like when you like spawn a cheese wheel on top of a mountain in Skyrim and you're just hurtling down the mountain and like bouncing off trees as the shark is so goofy. And it's weird that story is maybe the kind of most fun that kind of like the gameplay wise. It's so varied. It's so interesting. All of the creatures are kind of fun to control in different ways. And it's kind of one of the most horrific deaths, you know, in terms of like responsibility and her age and everything. And so it starts you off on kind of both extremes of like, this is real fun and it's real sad at the same time.
Yeah,
I wonder if that speaks to Molly's personality, because she was kind of like, you know, really young, really imaginative, so she had like maybe the most imaginative like sequence there.
That could be. If you want to be cynical or practical about it, I was thinking about like, why is this one first? And it's like, I wonder if it's just also for people watching video previews or watching streams, like having that big reaction early on of people like, look at a silly shark. Like somebody wrote in and they said that they bought the game because they were watching a Let's Play. and then saw that shark thing. It's like, well, this game is remarkable. I guess I have to check this out. And so maybe that's too callous to think of it that way, but I think it does make it pop really early on.
Oh, no, it's the God of War first level. This is their Colossus of Rhodes.
Yeah, I was like, what other sequence? Like, I feel like all of them. Well, maybe not all of them, but like, I think if you started with Barbara's, because I think Barbara's is one of the coolest ones stylistically.
Yeah. Well, and in both of those scenes, the music really struck me, both in Molly and Barbara's. Like Barbara's having the Did y'all recognize? So that's like the Halloween.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
That scared me more than the actual gameplay.
Yeah, I looked it up because I was like, that's the Halloween theme, and then apparently they straight up licensed that song. For the game.
It's so smart. It's just like, it brings everything to another level of like, they did it. They effing did the thing that we all want to be hearing right now. And like, F it, let's just give you exactly that. Yeah, it's incredible. Rock Party says, how unexpectedly graphic was the Halloween story? Finding the ear, and also how they never found the body. Also, was Milton never found? Yeah, just the graphic nature of that story in particular. It's like, I guess there's like the bloody ear and stuff like that, but because of the presentation style and having it all through this, Tales from the Crypt comic book presentation, it doesn't feel too gory.
Here's a question. What is this game rated? Is it T?
Depressing, I think. I think it's a D.
T.
Because I really like the tone that it has, where it's like, it feels kind of like a Miyazaki movie to me, where it's like the purpose of the game is not violent, but like when they show this owl eating a rabbit, it's not going to be cute. And like when you like bite the tail of a seal, there is going to be blood, because like there would be blood there, and it's not gratuitous, but it's also not kind of shying away from it. So I like that tone, and it made those moments of like finding an ear actually stand out much more.
Yeah. Cade Mead says, where does everyone stand on Barbara's death? All the other characters are given clear-cut answers. With Barbara's being from a comic book, it leaves it open to interpretation. The theory that I like best is Walter came from under the bed, startling Barbara, who fell through the railing and died. The guilt led to Walter locking himself away. The monster he was afraid of would have been Rick in the Bigfoot mask. There likely was never an ear found in the music box, but it was just made up for the comic. Well, don't they say something about like, oh, the police believe that the boyfriend just killed her. So I guess that's where I was leaning, is that, I'm sure that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I think it's fun to theorize. But I think it's like too about the storytelling and the symbolism.
One detail that I really like from that story, and this was another thing that Joseph Anderson pointed out, was that that comic is like, gross, kind of muckrakey, like using a real person's death to make a comic, but also someone from the family, and probably Edie, did have to like talk to the comic writers about that, because there's no other way that they would know that the music box worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
There was that line from Edith when I think it's when you finish Barbara's story or before it, where she's like, "Oh, Edie kept this." Like,
I can't believe she kept this one. But it's like everything else could have been kind of made up or illustrated or whatever. But it's like, that is how the music box works. And so someone from the family had to tell the writers of this comic, like, "Oh, we have this secret little music box thing."
And I wonder how much it's the writers versus Edie blowing it out. Maybe that was just verbatim the story that Edie told them,
Yeah. I think Edith said that Edie's reason for that was because Barbara had always wanted to be famous. So this to her was like honoring that. Like, well, you're famous now. This is great, right? And not like super messed up, at least in her mind. Yeah,
it's like she says something about how she has a happy ending in the end. Because like, she got what she wanted, to be famous. Now she's in this comic book. It's great.
She had her good scream. She screamed really well.
She really nailed it. Playing it again, it struck me that some of the voice acting is not as great as I remember. Like specifically a lot of the men in the game, like Walter, I like his section, but his voice acting is not great. And then Rick, the boyfriend in this section, I was like, oh boy, little rough compared to Edith.
I took Rick as an intentional choice because that comic seemed like it was supposed to be a cheesy, pulpy thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
It didn't bother
interesting.
me.
Okay. Yeah. Podbod says, I just wanted to point out that the pumpkin man who narrates Barbara's death in the comic book sounds exactly like Jeffem doing the Bobo character in the Game Informer replay episode where they play Falling Stars. I will put a comparison. It's a very deep cut. I think Jeffem was just doing Crypt Keeper, but I will put it after the credits here for the audio version so you can enjoy that or just listen to it. Let's see. Jason M. O'Brien says, I like how Edie spins fantastical half-truths. Not only does she give an interview that a dragon kills Sven, but she also gives another interview in which she says a mole man lives under her house. I presume she is referring to Walter, who retreated to a bunker in 1968 when he was 15. Does Edie's description of him seem a mite derogatory? Do you think Edie was ashamed of Walter? She lived a fearless life, facing every hardship head-on, only to have her son Walter burrow himself underground out of fear.
I think she liked having him under there. I think that it was like another fun, weird thing about her family.
Yeah.
Because you get the sense that it's like, I think Edith says some line basically about like she was bringing him food for this whole time, but it's like she is in some ways, in a lot of ways, enabling him to live this life. Like you can't live in a bunker underground for 30 years without someone else helping you. And you know, she was one of the few people who knew. So it seemed to her like, oh, it's kind of exciting. Like I've got this weird mole son.
Yeah.
She's just really a very quirky person, for better or worse. Like, just seems like she's kind of always trying to make light of her family situation, which sometimes seems inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, part of me wonders if it's like a coping mechanism, you know, to this horror. And I guess like one question I'd be interested in hearing y'all's thoughts on this is like, does Edie like telling stories too much? And like, maybe there's a lesson in that, you know?
Maybe. I mean, wasn't the thing she built the cemetery before she built the house? Like, she just immediately not cashed in, but like that was the curse was what she was focused on more than starting new. She's like, no, this is us. Let's get the cemetery started. We know this is going to happen. It's going to be great, I guess? Question mark.
And
I think with your kind of take on generational trauma, you know, the idea that like it's not like she started this, you know, like even she had been told that her family had a curse and whatever. And so I think it's just as valid a reading to say like, this is her way of dealing with it. And kind of the difference is like, she got to influence so many people with this reading, but I don't want to kind of put the blame on her as like she was, you know, evilly, you know, doing this to her family more than like she was also responding to a lot of trauma from her history, and we just didn't hear all of those stories.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I really appreciate hearing this story from Edith's perspective, because she sits really, I think, in between the middle of her mom and Edie. And even though she seems to empathize with Edie, I think if the story had been told by Edie or if it had been told by Dawn, like it would just be very different and we wouldn't like get that balance. And so it is like we do get to see like the different responses to, you know, these horrible events.
Yeah.
Tyler Carver says, one of the things I couldn't get over about this game was how crazy intricate the environmental designs were. It made the spaces feel truly lived in. It hit home during Gregory's vignette when you could knock all of the letters of his name off the bathtub into the water, and those same magnets were stuck to a locker in his room after he passed.
Yeah.
Also, that whole scene broke me, man. My kid was sitting next to me as that sequence was playing out, and I got crazy emotional. This was definitely the roughest chapter. It seems like Lewis's is everybody's favorite that wrote in, and then Gregory was the most traumatic here. Plus Ultra says, I've never played this or any other walking simulator before, so thank you for giving me a reason to try this. When I started playing this, I kept worrying that this was going to have horror elements in it, and it turned out not to be a scary game, but it does have many emotionally horrifying moments. The moment that got me the most was the exact moment when you start Gregory's story in the bathtub, in first person. I instantly knew where the story was going, and I literally put down my controller, wondering for over 10 minutes if it was worth it to continue. I did finish the game, but it's really stayed with me in a lot of ways I wasn't expecting.
I have a weird story about this one, Ben, which is that I kind of had this scenario spoiled by you before I played it, but in a way where it's like, So the situation was I was listening to the Game Informer show, and there is a question that was like, what's the most impactful moment, and you were like, I'm wondering if we're going too big, and maybe it's just like a bathtub in Edith Finch. And as soon as you said that, I was like, it's kind of appeared in my mind, like, oh, I think I know what happened. But I think one of the really good things about the scene is that, like, it's not contingent on surprise, that you know immediately what's going to happen. And so it's not like, I think if it was a shocking twist, it would be much more kind of tone deaf. But like the way that you know from the very offset that this is what's going to happen, it makes it more painful, but also I think more tasteful.
Yeah, it feels like when the moment happens, it kind of feels like, oh, he's going to like a happy, fun place now. Like he's going to a better place and not like this violent, like, you know, drowning or anything.
Right. It's
so in a weird way, it kind of makes it better.
I think I would hate this game. Yeah, I would think I would hate this game if at the end of every vignette they cut to like a shot of the character's like dead body lying there. Like it's not inconceivable for this game to have that, right? But it's just like such a fine balance of tone to make it like, oh no, it's beautiful, it's sad, moving on. Dylan Drazek says, as any parent can tell you, once you have a child, your sole intent in life is to raise that kid the best you can. So watching the scene play out, not quite knowing what is real and what is imagination, and knowing that the mother blames herself for her child's death was heart-wrenching. Instead of it just being a story of how a baby tragically died in a bathtub, it became a story of a parent's guilt and regret through the dialogue. So much of the genius of the same experience is lent to the writing team. They have such a refined ability to make every situation almost feel supernatural, yet completely believable given what we know about mental illness and trauma. Perspective is everything. Sorry for the rant. I just really enjoyed the experience, even if it was really sad. Yeah, it is interesting to frame it all through, in a way, the relationship of the parents there and how it ended up tearing them apart.
Yeah, like the divorce papers are what triggered that scene.
Right.
So.
But also, again, with this game, this really kind of beautifully delicate tone of like the fact that it's written on a divorce paper, but it is an incredibly kind and thoughtful letter. You know, it's not like an angry ex-spouse writing to another one. It's like, it's this beautiful kind of like, here's what happened, don't feel bad about this, you know, like there's still so much affection there even though they're clearly divorcing. Is just like, that's not the take that you would expect if someone just told you someone reads a divorce paper while you watch this awful thing happen. And it's in another instance of the game kind of like zagging where you expect it to zig.
Yeah. James Baldwin has a comment that kind of ties into what you were saying earlier about the Game Informer show. He says, there's so many complicated, massive games out there that have complex stories with huge voice casts and set pieces, and yet the only thing that has ever brought me to the verge of tears in a game was playing as a frog in a bathtub. It's a great point, James. Yeah, I mean, who needs mocap when you got a frog? Zach Gallo says, overall I enjoyed the game. However, I felt that there were some issues with the way some of the vignettes are designed. Many times I felt uncertain about where to go or what to do. Like in Gus's story, I was flailing the kite around hoping to make the narration progress further for about 5 minutes straight. Yeah,
Gus is probably like, there's a few times where you're kind of like spinning around, like where's the next like set of words I gotta interact with? But at least for me, it never lasted more than like maybe a few seconds of looking, but I could see that.
Yeah.
It is a little surprising to me that there isn't just like a hint that pops up. It seems like it would be, I'm not a game developer, but easy enough to be like after 2 minutes, there's just kind of like a redirects the camera over here or something.
Yeah. And sometimes they kind of do that with VO, like, you know, after you see Barbara's death, then they have that VO about like, oh, I've always been wondering about that music box, or they told me not to touch that music box. And so I know it's expensive to do that for every single possible place somebody could get stuck, but specifically like the place with the peeing or something, it could have used like a, hey, over here, you know, just something to make you look to the left.
Take a picture of me peeing.
Right now, yeah. Yeah, and it's a weird thing where the game does, you know, it's weird to call it a hand-holdy game, but in a lot of ways it is, right? It's trying to lead you down this guided path. And so you kind of fall into this false groove of like, well, I don't need to think too much. The game's got me covered. It'll show me where to go. So every once in a while, when it does leave you a little bit open, it's that weird feeling of like, oh crap, I'm on my own. I'm not used to this. And so that's why I think some people are getting stuck in some of these areas compared to if it was just a fully open experience. I don't think it'd be that jarring, but just having that transition between how much it's guiding you is what's bumping some folks. I guess we missed Calvin's sequence. Let's go back and mop that up here. So Amonto7 says, although Lewis had the most moving story in which I kept trying to avoid getting hurt, Calvin's story actually made the most lasting effect for me and something I've thought about several times over the past week. I kept thinking the rope was tearing and I swore playing through it I heard it tearing. It reminded me of growing up and having a swing set and us trying to always go as high as possible. And John Richards said that swing really nailed the physicality of swinging, and every pump brought a sincere joy.
Yeah, I think Calvin's story was it was the hardest for me to play because I stopped myself from swinging so many times. Just because for me, I'm not a parent, and so I think that Gregory's story wasn't as visceral for me. And for me, like what I remember is like, or the experience most proximate to me is swinging as a child. And so, and that feeling of trying to get like higher and higher. And I again I stopped completely and asked myself, like, why am I swinging? Like, why do I keep swinging? And again, it's to progress the narrative, but like I'm still asking myself that question, like, why do I keep playing? And for Calvin, it was like really hard for me.
Also, the fact that the poem is written by his brother is like, just another layer of tragedy, where it's like sometimes the letters are written by, a psychologist or whatever, and so it feels a little more detached. But this one was like, no, this is, like the person closest to him writing this is really just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and he said did he live in the room for like 7 more years after Calvin died? So he constantly had to deal
down his bed.
Yeah, that sequence was interesting just because it took me a while to figure out to use both legs. And they do a really subtle, smart hint of having like the text wrapped around the right leg to try and get you to interact with that in some ways. So you can get like the full swing going instead of some weird wobbly thing. Which I guess it's alarming that we haven't mentioned the text so far, really. But Osvaldo El Ruzo says, I'm a sucker for text. I have subtitles on for everything all the time. As soon as the words on the screen were sucked up the chimney when I first entered the house, I was hooked and I never let go.
That is pretty cool when it gets sucked up the chimney.
It's very good.
I think I love the text in a game, besides just being a really nice font choice. Like the way you interact with it, like walking through and seeing it kind of bend and then shatter as you walk through, like it's like alphabet soup kind of a thing for me. Like it adds, like, going back to like how this game manages to not be just a complete downer 100% of the time. Like that adds like just a layer of whimsy that like in itself kind of keeps the like the weird kind of like optimism or spirit up the entire time of like, oh man, this had just happened, but look at his text here, like this is so cool and like dreamy. So I think that goes a long way in maintaining that kind of lightheartedness of the game. So
yeah, I think so for sure. And there's so many little details that I forgot about of like, later on there's that dandelion that's made of text, which is so cool. Or like I love as Walter's spinning the can of peaches, I think, like it says the line like almost friendly on the can and it's like rotating with the environment. Or when Walter's then like banging out and the hammer.
Yeah, that one. And it's like probably way less expensive than them animating a breaking wall.
Yep.
But it's so effective to just like And I think, I kind of think the reason we haven't mentioned it is because it just feels like it fits into the world so well that it's like, well, of course there's floating text in the air. Like that's just what this world has. But then it totally fits into everything we've been talking about this kind of being a fable or a fairy tale, that you're literally seeing it written out. It's just a great choice. It just works really well.
And again, like in a sort of open-ish world, like space where we can, not like open world, but in a space where we can look around as much as we want. It is an effective tool from the game developers to direct our attention to specific areas, rather than just like controlling our camera.
Yeah. Toby Martin says it reminds him a lot of Splinter Cell Conviction and the text being like projected on the walls in that game, which that's the obvious connection. James Smith says, hello, Ben Finch. No! The floating text never ends on a full stop. They do use full stops, but never at the end of a block of floating text, which feels like a way of saying the story hasn't reached its conclusion yet. This comes full circle at the end when the very last line, things don't work out that way, does have a period at the end, and it's the only piece of floating text to have it. Very good eye, James Smith. Very impressive. Also,
interesting when you're playing a baby being birthed and there's just like text like flying towards you is a good weird moment.
That is one of those things. It's like, man, how did I not remember this? Where you're playing a game where you're playing, I guess, the baby version of a character you play for a little bit, and you see a vaginal opening from the inside. Like, what is this game? It is so wild. Let's see. John Richards says, the second I saw the silhouette of the house, my mind immediately drew parallels to Mark Danielewski's novel House of Leaves. Do you know this, Jacob?
I've made a video about this. Yeah, House of Leaves is a great, very weird book where the book itself is written in a way that's almost intentionally confusing. Like there are parts where like the words are like going around the pages in this weird labyrinth, and it's also about a house that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's a great kind of spooky idea of like a living house, and I think this totally fits the bill.
Oh, so Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, if you want to check that out. And he says it must have been a reference point for the developers. Fred DeNovo says, I'm sure a lot of people have talked about the similarities to the real-life Winchester house. I'm sure that must have been of inspiration for the developers. And Ian Dallas on Reddit, in that Reddit AMA, he was asked about his inspirations, and he says, the core inspirations for What Remains of Edith Finch were 100 Years of Solitude, Lord Dunsany's Book of Wonder, and this one blows my mind, and Bohemian Rhapsody was one of his inspirations for the game. So try and wrap your mind around that.
The other house that I thought of was actually from a series of unfortunate events.
I was thinking that too. There's also like the books and the game share a similar like weirdness and strangeness that's kind of inexplicable and like really sort of teeter this line between like reality and story. Or
I think it's the second book, maybe the third. It's called The Wide Window, and it's about like one of their aunts or something has a house built on the side of a cliff, and it's literally hanging off the cliff, and then there's stilts like attaching it to the thing. And so when I saw a house on stilts, I was like, oh, of course, that's what it is.
Ooh, I loved in the barber section when you're walking up to the front door from the inside too. And like the two windows on either side of the door, they have like eyes in them just to further cement the idea like, oh, this house is possessed in and of itself. It is a creature that could move at any moment here. Okay, the Lewis chapter. What do y'all think?
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty. The fact that it can successfully kind of gamify what he is thinking and what he is feeling, like making the chopping like heads thing or chopping up the fish, feel as mundane as it should, where it's easy enough to where you can do it without thinking, which is what that job is, and then still concentrate on his fantasy and then concentrate more on his fantasy, where you get to a point where you just start like your thumb moves automatically and you're just doing the fish thing. It's like it more than any other episode in that game sells what is going on in his head to me, because I think we've all had those moments where you're doing a really mundane job and you're just thinking about anything else but what you're doing, but you're still getting it done.
I had a moment while like, and I just had this moment while playing Lewis's story that was like, this is it. Like, this is why I believe in video games as a storytelling medium. Like, this is the power of that.
Yeah, like you could not do this anywhere else.
No.
Ben, did it make you think of your favorite game, Brothers?
Yes,
because
it does.
I totally got that. I just think it's impressive, and I mentioned this before, like the sheer amount of content, just from like like an asset creation standpoint that you have played functionally 80% of the game's like story, and then it's like, here are kingdoms that are kind of bigger than anything you've seen in the rest of this for one character's daydream is just absolutely wild.
Yeah, in that AMA, Ian Dallas says that they almost had to cut Gregory and Lewis's stories.
Wow.
Because they had to get
I'm
this
so
thing
glad
out
they
the
didn't.
door. I know, it's amazing they pulled it off.
Yeah. Did they say why?
No, I think Annapurna just wanted to ship it, or I don't know what exactly
like a
was
time
happening there.
thing?
Yeah.
I want to say this was before Annapurna Interactive had published almost anything else or whatever. Yeah. Now, and kind of because of this game, among others, it's like they're probably my favorite publisher.
Interesting.
But before this, I didn't really know them at all, and so it's interesting that they just keep hitting home runs. But this was an early one.
Yeah, for sure. And the part that you're talking about, Anna, about like it can only be done in a video game, just the first indication of that, it's so smart where they're like, his mind began to, and then you see that bubble pop up on the left and you don't even know what you're looking at. And it takes a while before you move the stick and then the character starts to move in that old dungeon crawler. And then they finish the sentence by saying his mind began to wander. It's like, it is such smart, amazing timing on their point.
No, it's incredible.
It's amazing how easy that thing is to play.
Yeah, well, and I was sort of like, oh, is there like a patting my head, rubbing my stomach kind of feel? But it's really not. Like, it feels seamless.
Jai Aldiar says, the Cannery Level in this game is one of the most powerful depictions of mental illness that I've ever come across in media. The involvement of the player in the story, trying to juggle the two aspects of his life as the monotony gets smaller and the internal world expands, is such a viscerally moving depiction of his struggle, and one that wouldn't have had the same impact in a less interactive medium. Yes, absolutely. Tom Blackburn says that it was the most affecting story for him. He said, when I played this for the first time, I just changed careers from working at dead-end jobs at coffee houses for 7 years to a random analyst position at an IT company. By the end of the Cannery story, I was in tears thinking about how much I connected with that character and how it was essentially an abstract, darkest timeline of my life, had I not taken a chance on a new start. Oof, video games, says Tom. Aesir Lord Thor also is going down that road. He says, I've occasionally had thoughts along the lines of, who really cares what happens to me when I can be exploring these fantastical worlds of video games and powerful stories that were created by hundreds of artists? Sometimes it's just the case that a game is just so cool that nothing else seems as important. But sometimes life is just so tough or confusing that I don't really want to be me anymore. I really appreciate the way this game was able to get me to be so introspective and to speak to an emotion that I haven't seen expressed anywhere else before.
Well, that's really powerful. And I mean, one, thank you to MinnMax community for sharing those things. But then also, I think that does speak to the power of this game, is that maybe it's not that there isn't like a singular takeaway lesson, but it's that this game captures like life so well and the cycles of life. And like, it's, sometimes not grandiose, but that it just captures the feeling, in this case, of monotony and falling into that so perfectly.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any thoughts on after that sequence when you interact with his like fake Super Nintendo thing, and Edith talks about like, oh yeah, Lewis and I used to play games all the time. He was surprisingly really bad at them. And I remember being taken aback at that because he's like obsessed with like fantasy and stuff. You're like, oh, he's probably like a really good gamer, but apparently he was not.
Well,
and
do you think he's letting his little sister win though?
Maybe.
Oh.
I never thought about that. That could be.
Oh,
yeah, that could be it.
Yeah, because you see like a bowl on his desk. I think he was just like...
I think they probably could not have indicated more clearly that he liked weed.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway from this game, is don't smoke weed or you'll end up decapitated, I believe.
Don't smoke weed, kid.
Also, the song Real Earworm.
It's very good. Yeah. I love it. Crater has the most important note here saying Minneapolis.
Yeah, Minneapolis. Yeah.
Yep.
It's very good. Yeah, there's so many.
I felt very seen in that moment. I was like, hell yeah.
I really laughed more at St. Louis because it was like, oh, it's so obvious.
This is right there. Remember when Ubisoft launched the Club? Was that their driving game? Is it
Yeah.
called the club? Now I'm up in my head about it. And they called St. Louis. They spelled it like that in the game. Then they had to patch it out. Yeah.
Was that the one where they also had the restaurants that just said like pizza, lettuce, or whatever? They had like the weird algorithmically generated signs.
Oh, I miss my favorite lettuce restaurant. It's shut down with COVID now. There's so many fun details, like you mentioned, Jacob, during the section. Like, I love just one quick reference to Mario where you like jump on the pole and it makes the like cute sound as you're sliding down and stuff. It's very fun. And I love the idea that you can't get fully absorbed in the fantasy either, that like at times they're gating it with a fish in the environment that you need to slice in half in order to progress. Mm-hmm. It's such a smart balance back and forth. Did you guys, am I reading too much into it? Did you think anything of that section where there's like a split in the river and you choose between like a most beautiful prince or a wonderful princess? Like, were you choosing Lewis's sexuality or is that just completely artificial nothing?
That's how I looked at it.
You did? Okay. In a way, then, is that like the only choice in the game?
Yeah, well, you also choose if you wanted to go for rainbows or serpents.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
What kind of music you heard?
Yeah, I think so. It's a nice reading of like, he's not just a straight guy by default like everything else.
Sure. Noah Berman says, I couldn't stop thinking about this game for weeks after playing it. One of the quotes that stuck with me was during Lewis's story at the Cannery, per his psychiatrist's letter. Lewis said, quote, "My imagination is as real as my body. I can't help but feel that this is the family curse. The family home, their origin, their history, and their fates were all driven by their unwillingness to sacrifice their creative and curious fascination with the world around them for the sake of their own survival. They're all born with pure enlightenment. It's only fitting that this realization becomes apparent only once you've climbed to the peak of the house, to the newest, most unique parts of its architecture." Thank you, Noah.
That's a great take.
Yeah,
I really like that.
Yeah.
Jeremy Tanner says, did any of the flashbacks disappoint you? I was personally let down when we walked out to the sea, only to not be able to go inside the old house to see what it looked like. I still love the game overall, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's intentionally disappointing.
Right.
But it is disappointing nonetheless, which we talked about earlier. But for me, I think Milton's there was the flip book, and that was cute, but I felt like I wanted to know more about Milton's life leading up to that.
Yeah. You think they could have had like a demo of Unfinished Swan in there or just something real quick, because it's such a cool mechanic. Just let us do like the first fourth of the first level of that game and call it good.
I feel like Milton's, I got what I wanted out of that when you go to the cemetery and you see his stone, and Edith talks about how, I think Edie said like, oh, it's not a gravestone. Oh no, I think it was Dawn saying like, this isn't a gravestone, this is a monument.
Yeah.
Because she's still holding out hope, and I thought that was kind of like a good play.
That whole graveyard is so good that, other than the kind of like the various stories that you play through, I think the cemetery might be kind of my favorite part of exploring the house, because you get to see all of the stories you've already heard, but then you also see the ones that you haven't, and you kind of just imagine like, well, I'm going to run into them at some point. Like, is this gravestone telling me something about how they ended? And you can look at, you can see Gregory's like dates, which is pretty like, oh, you know what happens to him. Like, that is a headstone for a toddler. Mm-hmm. So I just love all the detail that's put in that cemetery.
Even Lewis's has a crown on top.
Yeah. I do love that they each have kind of their own icon. It's a very fun video gamey thing. Sean Mills says, I was shocked to see Sam Barlow and Neil Druckmann listed as playtesters during the credits. I tried Googling to find out how they got involved with this game, but the only mention I found was an article at Game Informer by Kyle Hilliard that just mentions that there's a lot of big names in the credits. Did Kyle talk to the developers about this? No, I don't think so. I think it was just listing out all those names. That was wild to see. Also, it's very nice to see those credits roll and all those old pictures of the developers as kids. I thought that was really sweet.
But also kind of sad given the content of the game.
I guess that's true. If it was like an Unfinished Swan, it's like, oh, okay, it's whimsy. You got to have that in there. And now you're looking at it, it's just like, oh, I'm so sorry for your family, for each and every person here.
Those pictures.
Travis Brinkley says, how incredible is it that a game can have this much complexity and variety where you really only press one button outside of movement? Great point. BeatenDownBrian 912 says, do you have any thoughts on the son's cast. Do you think some kind of accident is what prompted him to make the journey back to the house, or is it just meant to be a visual cue that it's not Edith? Probably the latter.
Oh,
Yeah.
the son.
I do also think like the idea that it's like maybe he's already living his life in kind of a risky way, you know, that this is just what this family does, and he's obviously he's not dead because he's visiting, but like, you know, he's a kid with a cast. Maybe he's kind of a daredevil. Maybe he's gonna, you know, climb a tree or do something that, you know, in the line of Finches will kind of put him in that same saga.
Yeah. Also in that Reddit AMA, somebody asked what that kid's name was. And Ian Dallas says his name is Christopher. I can't remember if I named him after Molly's goldfish or after our level designer, Chris Bell. Maybe both. But I forgot that goldfish was named Christopher too. So it's a fun connection, even though it's not in the game anywhere. But this is a little backstory.
I tried to eat it.
Oh, yeah.
I tried to eat it too.
Did anyone think that Molly's room was weirdly modern for a kid that died in the 40s?
Yes. And that made me wonder about if it was, you know, Edith imagining these things, because it was like, I'm pretty sure all these appliances wouldn't have been here, you know, 80 years ago.
Yeah, like the Molly on the doors looks like something I would go to like Home Goods today and get.
Right. Not Podbod. Jan Hildebrand says 2 words, good luck. What a powerful moment. It's the last voice line of the game. For the whole game, Edith has been very confident, but just now, when she realizes she will be gone by now and her son is out there alone with the curse, her voice breaks in anxiety for the first time. You just have to feel with her. Edith Finch is the most relatable character I've encountered in a video game. Exceptional writing, exceptional voice acting. Yeah, that final line is great. Here's a very dumb question, and it might nullify the entire game club discussion.
All right.
What happened to Edith Finch?
She died giving birth to Christopher.
Was that clear?
Not really, but I remember when I played it the first time, like I suspected it, and then I like looked it up, and apparently that is what happened.
Oh, so wait, what are the cues that point to that? Because I just completely missed it. Yeah. But that would make sense.
There really isn't any, because she never says it, but I like playing it the second time knowing it, I was like actively looking to see like, is there like anything?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe when you come out of the womb and then there's the light and it just transitions to you being the kid.
But if it's but the way she's writing it makes it seem like she knows she's gonna die, right?
Do you think she knows she's gonna die?
I mean, it seems
by
that
association
way.
Of like, well, this happens to everyone else.
Yeah, I think she kind of believed in the curse.
Yeah.
More than like, I am going to have a medical complication or whatever the other idea would be. But I agree. I kind of assumed that, but also I don't love that I assumed that, you know, just because it's like, oh, well, it's a woman giving birth in a fictional story. So like this happens.
She dies of a broken heart like Amidala.
Yeah. And I think it was supposed to be, because I didn't realize this pattern to the second time, but every Finch generation, like most of the family members die, but there's always one surviving one, and it's always been a woman, because it's like it's been Edie, and then that woman goes on to have a bunch of kids, and then most of them die except for one, and then it's Dawn, and then Edith, but now this time it's a boy, Christopher, and he's the last one.
Yeah.
And he's
and I think that's really interesting, because traditionally, like in like cultures with like oral histories, where like oral history is like a dominant mode of communication, oftentimes it is the women that carry on those stories. And so that could be gesturing towards that, but also, you know, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I really like the fact that we don't need to get like a story about her boyfriend who left or something. That it's just like, it's just not important. We don't need this story. She's just pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think how would you think they would have gone about if they wanted to make it more clear how she died? Like, how do you think they could do that?
It could have been like Holy Grail, like she ends the journal just like, or whatever. I don't know. I have no idea. Captain Stubbs 1 writes into a very important comment saying, this game was quite the experience to play through. I'm glad the community chose it, as I likely would have missed it otherwise. I'm a locksmith in real life, and as such, I've I'm always looking at locks and keys in video games to see how accurate they are to real life. The key Edith holds in the beginning may be the best looking key I've seen in a video game. I feel like I could decode it visually and make a working key.
Okay, I love that.
That's very nerdy.
This is why you have a community band.
Oh, yeah. The problem arises when Edith sticks it into the padlock to open the book in the first room Walter is in, if I remember correctly. That kind of key would never work with that style of padlock. They use a Schlage C keyway key, and that padlock would only take a master M1 key, so overall the game's a 6.5 out of 10.
Okay, but I'm just saying this, that if he made a replica of the key, that would sell. Like, that would be a product that would sell.
I don't know. I think Kingdom Hearts still gives it a run for its money.
Gives you a key.
Yeah, you probably get sued if you tried to sell Keyblades, but selling Edith Finch keys, I feel like you could get away with. How, Captain Stubbs, when you might have to write in again, maybe to the MinnMax show, how do keys work? Are there like a set number? What's the number of key varieties out there? Or is it like a random waveform shape? How does that work?
I think it depends on the key.
But like if I have a key and I tried every house in the world, how many could it open?
Do you make the do you make the key first or do you make the lock first?
I think they're made in conjunction, and then you pull it out, and then you've got the perfect.
Just keep theorizing about this. Eventually,
it'll become a live
key
show.
For the lock or the lock for the key?
Zaxarium says, "My God, the sounds within this game get me every time. From the beautiful music to the train that hits, everything is so incredibly well timed." Yeah, you mentioned the soundtrack. Apparently, somebody wrote in as well saying that the soundtrack is the composer is the same composer as Star Trek Picard.
I was listening to it last night, and I saw that was it was on his discography.
That's awesome. Any other thoughts that we haven't hit about What Remains of Edith Finch?
I really like just the kind of like little interactions you do. Talking about the locks made me think of this, but like the fact that you just kind of like rotate the stick to like turn something or pull something. It feels kind of like a Quantic Dream thing, but not as in your face about it, where it's like, well, you have to lift this thing up, and so you're going to push the thumbsticks up. Those are all just really cute and satisfying to me.
Yeah, I wonder if it would have been a Sony published game when it released, if they would have incorporated the touchpad more or tried to make it more gimmicky, even like motion controls or something. Because playing it now, it's like, oh my God, it's crazy that this isn't a VR game because it all feels so tactile. Like you should be manipulating
so
in VR.
In VR. Can you imagine the Lewis chapter in VR? I would lose my mind.
Oh my God, it would be bizarre. In that, it feels like we should have just read that Reddit AMA. You can check it out. But in that, somebody asked Ian Dallas if the game is ever going to be ported to VR, and he's like, yeah, we want to, but I think people will get really nauseated really easily. Like think of like the Molly stuff in particular. I think people would puke their brains out.
Maybe the swing section would probably.
Oh my God. Yeah. But I could see it. I could see like launch of PS5 with a VR version of Edith Finch. That'd be a funky choice.
And like Unfinished One would also work really well for that.
Yeah.
Getting off, but like these games.
Yeah. By the way, Giant Sparrow, on their site, they say that they're working on their next game right now and that they're very interested in exploring animation and character movement and animal movement. They say, we're drawing inspiration from works like Eco, Windowsill. Does anyone know what that is? Spirited Away, The Life of Birds, and The Spirit of Winsor McKay and the early Disney films like Bambi and Fantasia. That's a very fun premise. I'm curious to see what you end up doing with a Giant Sparrow. But okay, any other thoughts? What Remains of Edith Finch?
Great game. One of the generation's best.
I really think so. I think playing it again cemented as like, God, I love this game when it came out, but I don't know. I think it's aged really well, and I do think it is one of the best of the generation.
I feel like it's a game you could maybe show your parents or other non-gamers if you're still kind of fighting the fight of like, this is legit, this isn't just people shooting things. Seems like a really good way to demonstrate.
It's the walking simulator kind of like killer, so to speak. Like it's the thing you use to be like, hey, these games are cool, try this one. Like there's a lot of other stuff going on besides just walking. Like that is the number one recommendation I've always given for these kind of games is that game.
Right.
Well, and I think actually, on that note, bringing people into games, like, it's a good game to invite someone to watch you to play. I know I've actually met 2 people who are like, oh yeah, like, I haven't played Edith Finch, but I've watched someone play it, like, in its entirety. And I got a lot out of it and I really enjoyed it. So, like,
I'm totally with you. My girlfriend is from Seattle, and she was in the room while I was playing it and could not have been less interested in what was happening on the screen. I kept waiting for, like, she's going to look up one of these times she's going to look up from her phone. No, not interested. So it takes all kinds, though. We'll see. Great. That is the deepest dive on what remains of Edith Finch. Thank you to everybody that submitted a comment. Thank you to everybody that played along. Thank you to everybody that helped spread the word about deepest dives. You can probably guess the game we're going to be doing next for the deepest dive, but we will have a post up explaining what that's going to be like on this Friday, I do believe. So please look forward to that. Anna, anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, sure. Follow me on Twitter at Pokachi, Chee, and follow my employer, Hey Glitch.
There you go. Marcus.
Follow me on Twitter at MarcusStewart7, the number 7, and on YouTube at Marcus Makes Media. Finishing the fight. Wrapped up Halo 3 recently, jumping into ODST this weekend. So that should be fun.
Awesome. Jacob.
My Twitter back. You can follow.
What is the story there? What happened with you on Twitter?
Okay, I'll tell you how I got it back, because I still don't have an answer of why I was banned, but I filed with the Better Business Bureau, and like 4 days later, they were like, here you go. So that worked. But anyway, my Twitter is Jacob Geller, as is my YouTube channel. See me both of those places. I made a video about Edith Finch, although warning, it's not particularly polished, but I think the content is good.
Okay, great. Check it out, and we'll have links in the description for all this stuff. Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for playing along with us or just watching or listening to this, and we'll see you next time for The Deepest Dive. Bye, everybody. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.